Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. I'm going to sketch out for you tonight a conspiracy theory that was apparently floating around the former president of the United States and the upper echelons of power in this country in the aftermath of the 2020 election. Now, I got to say, it's a conspiracy so outlandish and ridiculous, the fact that anyone with a line of communication to the commander-in-chief believed it is honestly shocking and deeply disquieting. But here we go, all right? According to the theory, there is a computer server in Germany which contains evidence that a shadowy deep state cabal used rigged voting machines to change millions of votes during the 2020 election in order to steal the election from Donald Trump and hand it to Joe Biden. Here is Sidney Powell, one of the lawyers who worked with Trump to attempt a coup, discussing this mind-blowing conspiracy just over 2 weeks after the election.
There's reports that there was a piece of hardware, possibly a server, picked up in Germany. Is that true, and is it related to this?
That is true. It is somehow related to this, but I do not know whether good guys got it or bad guys got it.
Okay, that's a strange thing to ask out of context and to answer in that way. I don't know if good guys got it or bad guys got it. What are you talking about? Now, that claim is outlandish enough that there's some server that has a smoking gun evidence, the election fraud that, again, didn't happen, that maybe the good guys or the bad guys got. But it gets so much weirder, okay? According to this theory, then CIA Director Gina Haspel traveled to Germany to destroy this smoking gun server with all the evidence the conspiracy is stealing the election from Trump. But while she was there, the conspiracy alleges something went wrong. Haspel was injured, possibly during a special forces raid. And again, depending on who you believe, she was either killed or detained in Guantanamo Bay on treason charges or still being held captive in Germany. Keep in mind, Gina Haspel's just chilling in Virginia as the head of the CIA. Like, she's not anywhere. She's just there, okay? But that's what the theory says. Now, you're probably thinking this is the kind of unhinged, paranoid thinking that only lives deep within Facebook groups and anonymous forums. Reality is much weirder than that. You see, according to reporting in John Carl's new book, Betrayal, we've learned Sidney Powell, Donald Trump's lawyer who we played for you a moment ago, not only believed there was a secret server in Germany with proof of a rigged election, as she said there, she also apparently believed the part about the CIA director being held as a political prisoner for her role in the cover-up. Again, according to the book, Sidney Powell, that woman you saw there, the president's lawyer, reached out to a senior Trump intelligence official who worked in the Pentagon, a guy named Ezra Cohen. And she knew him through their mutual associate, Michael Flynn. So she calls Ezra Cohen, who she thinks is going to be a reliable ally, and demands he take action. Quote, Gina Haspel has been hurt and taken into custody in Germany, Powell told Cohen. You need to launch a special operations mission to get her. Carl goes on to write, Powell believed Haspel had embarked on this secret mission to get the server and destroy the evidence. In other words, the CIA director was part of the conspiracy. Okay, just take a second and drink this in. Calls up someone, high-ranking official at the Pentagon, to say, yo, dude, gotta launch a special forces mission to go get back the CIA director who's been captured because she was trying to get back the secret server that has evidence. What? I mean, Donald Trump's lawyer, I guess one revelation here was not just cynically promoting bogus conspiracies to sow out in the election. According to this reporting, she was a true believer, calling up allies in the Department of Defense to rescue the head of the CIA, whom she believed was guilty of a conspiracy to steal the election. Then remember, this woman had the ear, the trust of the former president, the most powerful man on earth, a man who, when she made that call, still had control of the nuclear codes. And joining me now for his first national television interview as candidate for governor of Texas, Beto O'Rourke. It's good to have you, Beto. First, I want to ask about what was the moment when you decided to run for this office and why governor, when previously you'd been a member of Congress, you'd run for Senate, you'd run for president. Why this office? Why now?
There's such a great opportunity in Texas to bring the people of this state together and do the really big things that most of us care about and want for our families, like making sure that the best jobs in America are created right here in Texas, or that we have world-class public schools for our kids to go to, or that we make some progress on some pretty common sense issues like expanding Medicaid, which would allow hundreds of thousands more Texans to be able to see a doctor and would do a world of difference to bring down our property tax bills. But it's also about getting past this moment where Greg Abbott has brought us to such a small place. the bounty placed on the heads of Texas women who want to make their own personal health care decisions, the permitless carry law that allows anyone to carry a firearm without a background check or any training whatsoever in Texas, and these transgender bathroom bill bans or deciding which girls can play which sports in this state. We got to get past that small, mean vision of Texas and get back to the big things. We got to make sure that everyone can come together and allow this state to reveal its potential. I'm pretty proud of Texas, and I want to make sure that I serve this state as its next governor.
You're obviously you're not a political analyst. You're a politician yourself. You run for office, but I imagine when you're sitting with your advisors, you're thinking about the possibility of a campaign. People said, look, 2018, you had one of the best performances of any statewide Democratic candidate in years in the state of Texas, but in a pretty favorable macro environment. 2018 generally a pretty favorable midterm for Democrats when they're the out party. Looking ahead to next year, you got a Democrat in the White House. We've got a country that is still trying to get out from under this once-in-a-century crisis. There's a lot of people who must have been telling you, like, you're going to get this is hard enough, but add the environment to this, and you are really looking down the barrel of a difficult task.
You know, that might be the case, but that's not how we feel here in Texas. And I'll tell you why. Beyond that big, bold vision that we want to get back to, beyond getting past these extremist, divisive politics of Greg Abbott, there's also some basic things that we need to make sure that we get right, like our electricity grid. Under Greg Abbott's watch, the energy capital of North America, the state of Texas, lost power for millions. And not only was it an inconvenience, and not only were many homes ruined when the pipes first froze and then burst, but we lost the lives of hundreds of our family members and neighbors, including an 11-year-old boy, Chris, who froze to death in his bed. Those are the consequences of Greg Abbott, and that is not lost on the people of Texas. 72,000 have lost their lives under this pandemic throughout his administration because he's rejected the science and the best guidance from public health experts. In fact, he wouldn't allow local school districts to require masks in the classroom. And so as of September, we led the country in the numberhood of childhood COVID cases and deaths. The people of Texas know that we need change. They understand the cost and consequence of keeping Greg Abbott in office. And I think you're going to see that in the turnout in this election and the participation of voters here in communities like Laredo, where I'm spending the second day of this campaign, a community that has so much to offer this state and the rest of the country. I want to make sure that we reflect that pride that we see here in Laredo, and that we also protect the lives of the people here in Laredo and across the state of Texas. I think that gives us an extraordinary opportunity to make the case and to win this election.
I want to note that the polling on the governor's job approval rating has gone down considerably. So there is, I think, fair to say, widespread disaffection with him. It's quite notable since 2020. He's 5 points underwater. There's also polling showing you and him tied in a head-to-head back in October. He has spent a lot of time, the governor, on talking about the border. There has been a lot. Abbott has brought governors from other states down to the border. He has gotten pressure from his right flank, folks like Alan West, who are primarying him, to deploy more of the National Guard there. What do you think about the governor's approach to the border?
I'll tell you, as someone who was born and raised on the border, and who, with my wife Amy, is raising our 3 kids on the border in El Paso, and someone who chose to come here to Laredo on the second day of this campaign, also on the border, if we want to know the answers to these questions, we've got to ask the people who actually live them and experience them and understand them. And so that begins with ensuring that those who represent us, whether in Congress or in the White House, actually make some progress on rewriting our immigration laws. And that in the meantime, we come back to these communities and ask what it is that they need and how we can better support them. But we also need to reflect the fact that we are a state, and in this case in Laredo, a community of immigrants. And their presence here makes us stronger, makes us more successful, and makes us safer than we would be otherwise. This is a really great thing that we have in Texas, the fact that so many people from around the world have chosen to make this state our home and make us so much more successful by their very presence. But the last thing we need to do is what Greg Abbott has been doing. He's been calling this an invasion. He's been asking Texans to take matters into their own hands. These are literally his words. And it's that kind of dangerous rhetoric that inspired somebody a little more than 2 years ago to drive 600 miles from Allen, Texas, with an AK-47 and open fire on people in El Paso, killing 23 of them, claiming that he was there to repel an Hispanic invasion of Texas. That's also the cost and consequence of Greg Abbott. That is not a Texas value, not for Republicans or Democrats alike. That is too extreme, too radical, and too dangerous for this state.
You had supported some kind of assault weapons ban reinstating and perhaps even a mandatory gun buyback of certain weapons. The state basically telling no one would be able to have those weapons. They wouldn't be grandfathered in. It was a plank of your campaign. You said at one point, in referring to what had happened in your hometown, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow them to be used against our fellow Americans anymore. Do you still support that?
I do, and it's because most of us in this state that has a proud, long tradition of responsible gun ownership, which we lived in the O'Rourke household, where my Uncle Raymond, who is a sheriff's deputy, taught me and my sisters how to shoot, and also the responsibility that comes with owning and using a firearm. We don't think that people should have weapons of war, and we shouldn't have to worry about our friends, our family members, our neighbors being shot up at the grocery store, in the movie theater, or in our schools, or at church. What we do know is that there's a lot of consensus in common sense solutions like an assault weapons ban or like background checks, universal background checks that would save the lives of our fellow Texans. What we don't want is what Greg Abbott has just done. He signed a bill into law that allows any Texan to carry a loaded gun in public, despite the fact that 35,000 licenses to carry a firearm requests were denied by law enforcement in this state over the last 5 years. All those people can now carry a loaded gun in public, as can the tens of thousands who knew better than to even apply for a license to carry. That's why police chiefs, law enforcement, who we should be supporting in this state, begged the governor not to sign that into law. Most Texans understand that, so we're going to work together to make sure that we have common sense gun legislation and protect the Second Amendment here in the state of Texas.
Nicole Hannah-Jones covers civil rights and racial injustice for the New York Times Magazine. She's creator of the 1619 Project, for which she won a Pulitzer Prize in 2020, and the new book called The 1619 Project, A New Origin Story. Nicole, it's great to have you on. Congratulations on publication. You know, this has become such a part of the American discourse. I mean, I think to a degree that I don't know, but I imagine you didn't necessarily anticipate becoming quite the central axis of like the national debate. And so I wonder if someone comes up to you and says, well, I've sort of heard about it. I've heard about the 1619 Project. Like, what is it? What's your sort of summary to someone who's like, what is the project? What does it mean?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, and you're absolutely right. I couldn't have predicted any of this. But what the 1619 Project is the year 1619 is the year that the first Africans were sold into the colony of Virginia. So that marks the beginning of American slavery. And what we argue in the project, which commemorated the 400th anniversary of that moment, was that slavery is so foundational to the United States that its legacy can be seen all throughout aspects of modern American society. So in capitalism, in our highway systems, in our educational systems, in incarceration, in our culture, and that these connections can be drawn in many surprising ways, including the very democracy itself. So through a series of essays as well as pieces of short fiction and poetry, we really try to center slavery in the narrative of the American story and the contributions of Black Americans, which have largely been treated as an asterisk.
Yeah, I want to read from the essay that was first published. It's in the book as well. When you talk about sort of patriotism, your father, the sort of opening scene, your father hoisting the flag outside your home in Waterloo, you say, my father, one of those many Black Americans who answered the call, knew what it would take me years to understand, that the year 1619 is as important to the American story as 1776. That Black Americans, as much as those men cast in alabaster in the nation's capital, are this nation's true founding fathers. No people has a greater claim to that flag than us. And I keep coming back to that sentence because it seems to me there's a strong version of that claim and a weaker version, or sort of more provocative and a less provocative, right? In the language, you say that year is as important to the American story as 1776. My interpretation of the meaning of this project is, Well, we know 1776 is important. That's the sort of foundational moment. We get that story. Here's a story that should be on equal footing, this kind of yin yang of what our story is. I think there are people who are saying that think you are saying this is the fundamental essential truth about the nation, that this is more important in some ways than 1776. And I'm curious to hear you talk through how you think about it.
Yes, so that language was written that way on purpose. And what we are really arguing is that so much of what makes America unique in ways good and bad, right? The societal tensions, the kind of our greatest divides, our polarization, but also our culture, our language, our music, our cuisine, again, democracy itself, that so much of that begins with that decision in 1619 to engage in African slavery. And so it's really saying, how could we better understand our country if we considered 1619 as an origin point? As you said, we all know the story of 1776, and that's a story of these intrepid colonists who decide that they need to break off from the British Empire so that they can have freedom and liberty and so that they can create a society based on individual God-given rights. But the truth is, in 1776, 1/5 of the population in those 13 colonies was enslaved. They lived in absolute bondage. And so that narrative of freedom is not enough to explain our society. We are a country that was founded both on the ideas of freedom and the practice of slavery. And so we say, if you want to really understand that, these defining tensions, you have to go back to 1619.
I want to read for you a passage of a new North Dakota bill that has become law. It is like a lot of legislation that has passed throughout the country, particularly in Republican-controlled states, that has attempted to target what the bill's authors call critical race theory, but a term that has become kind of amorphous, I think. So they give a specific definition. I think it's useful and elucidating. Here's what this law says that it is banning. For purposes of this section, critical race theory, which is what they want to ban, means the theory that racism is not merely the product of learned individual bias or prejudice, but that racism is systematically embedded in American society and the American legal system to facilitate racial inequality. The bill then bans instruction relating to that belief. Systematically embedded in American society, the American legal system facilitate racial inequality strikes me as actually a pretty good summation of a view you have and that the 1619 project sort of grows out of, and kind of names a little bit of the fundamental fight here about whether that's going to be taught or not.
Yes. So one, can we just acknowledge that it is insane that a state legislature would say that you can't even teach the concept of structural racism? Not that you're even saying we have it, but that you can't even teach the concept of it. We all as Americans should be outraged and very worried, whether you like the 1619 Project or critical race theory at all. But we need to understand what they're saying then. It is inarguable that our country was founded with racism in the law, with racism in the courts, with racism in every structure of our society. One only has to look at the Constitution, which labels enslaved people 3/5 of a person. We only have to look at the slave codes and the black codes and the fact that I have 2 books that are biblical length that are just a listing of all of the ways that black people were discriminated against in the law. This is inarguable. We had legal segregation in this country until a decade before I was born. And that said, you could segregate against black people in housing, in schools, in the courts. You could discriminate against black people when it came to employment, whether they could go to the public library or a public swimming pool. All of these areas of life, legally, you could discriminate against black people from 1619 all the way up until 1968. So it's ludicrous to say that you have to teach a understanding of this country that says it's only individual actors. There's nothing systemic here. And that clearly, Chris, is a response not just to the framing of the 1619 Project, which of course argues that racism is embedded in the structures of a society that was founded with 1/5 of the population enslaved. But what it's also saying is it is a response to the racial protests of last year, where people were saying it's not just about individual bad cops. It's not just about policing, that we have a society that is built to be fundamentally unfair, and we are dealing with the ramifications of that. So this is seeking to turn us away from thinking like that, and instead to say this is just about individual white people who may have prejudice, and it's about making white people as a race feel guilty and bad, and it's neither of those things.